Welcome to the case of the cursed cargo, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire. The unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1898. It is with some surprise that I find these particular records of my adventures with Mr. Sherlock Holmes now seeing the light of day. For many years, they remained classified Foreign Office documents, detailing affairs far beyond the usual ken of Baker Street. Our investigations during those years, from 1885 towards the brink of the Great War, often plunged us into the murky depths of imperial politics and colonial intrigue. Holmes, with his singular methods, navigated a complex web of loyalty and betrayal, uncovering secrets that could shake the foundations of British power. These accounts, drawn from official reports and our personal letters, form the collection known as Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes. Allow me, then, to commence this series of recollections with a most peculiar affair which became known as the case of the cursed cargo. Chapter. The summons had reached us at Baker Street on a raw November morning, delivered by a liveried footman whose agitation was palpable. It was from Lady Beatrice Foxglove, an acquaintance of some standing, and spoke of a matter requiring Mr. Sherlock Holmes's immediate and discreet attention. Thus, we found ourselves, not an hour later, amidst the clamour and grime of the London docks. The air hung thick with the scent of tar, brine, and decaying matter, a biting wind sweeping in from the grey expanse of the Thames. The rigging of a nearby clipper whined a mournful tune, punctuated by the sharp cries of gulls, a constant accompaniment to the bustling activity. Her voice, when she greeted us near a towering stack of crates, was strained, though she maintained an air of aristocratic composure. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for your promptness. The situation is distressing," Lady Beatrice Foxglove said. She was a woman of perhaps 40 years, her face etched with worry, yet her eyes held a keen intelligence. She gestured towards a large, gloomy warehouse, its great wooden doors slightly ajar, from which a peculiar and deeply unpleasant odor, quite distinct from the general dockside miasma, assailed my nostrils even from this distance. As we approached the source of this olfactory assault, the usual cacophony of the docks, the shouts of stevedores, the rumble of iron-wheeled drays over cobblestones seemed to recede, overwhelmed by the encroaching stench. "It concerns the shipments of rubber, Mr. Holmes, from the East Africa Trading Company. Sir Charles Harrington is facing ruin," responded Lady Beatrice Foxglove. A dark foreman, his face grim, pulled open one of the heavy doors wider for us with a protesting groan of wood and metal. The stench that billowed forth was overwhelming. I recoiled from the putrescent wave. Inside the dimly lit warehouse, a truly horrific sight awaited us. What should have been valuable raw rubber had become a decaying, malodorous mass of bales. A viscous, black slime coated much of the cargo, and the very air seemed to crawl with the scent of its corruption. It was a scene of utter, almost deliberate, ruination. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued, "This is the third such shipment, each worse than the last. Sir Charles believes it incompetence, a natural blight. But Mr. Holmes, I suspect something far more sinister. There are grievances, deep-seated grievances, stemming from the colonies. I have heard dreadful accounts, Mr. Holmes, tales of villages displaced for the plantations, of men forced into labor under appalling conditions, their traditional livelihoods destroyed. Whispers of exploitation, of lives ruined for profit, of families torn apart. The company, in its relentless pursuit of wealth, has sown much bitterness. I fear this is not mere spoilage, but a desperate act of sabotage, a reckoning for injustices that can no longer be borne in silence," remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes, who had remained silent, his keen grey eyes sweeping over the scene, stepped forward without a word. He knelt beside one of the afflicted bales, oblivious to the filth, his long fingers delicately probing the corrupted material. In the oppressive quiet of the warehouse, the only sounds were the distant creak of a ship's timbers and the steady drip of some foul liquid from the ruined cargo. Holmes produced his pocket lens, examining a patch of the blight with intense concentration. At length he rose, his expression thoughtful. The uniformity of the decay is most striking, Lady Beatrice, and its rapidity, if your account of previous shipments holds true, suggests a catalyst of considerable potency, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He moved along the lines of bales, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He picked up a loose strand of packing material here, sniffed at an apparently less affected section there, his movements precise and economical. The dark workers watched him with a mixture of awe and suspicion, their usual gruff voices hushed, adding to the warehouse's somber stillness. "This is no random affliction of nature, Watson," he declared, his voice cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. "Observe the pattern of contamination. It appears to have initiated from within the bales, yet spread with an almost preternatural speed," declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused, considering. Such a blight, to be so effective across multiple shipments, must have been introduced where the cargo was vulnerable. A processing facility in the colony, perhaps, or during loading. The method is sophisticated, designed for maximum effect. Sherlock Holmes responded. His words painted a chilling picture of calculated malice. The scale of such an operation to contaminate cargo thousands of miles away was bewildering. How could such a thing be accomplished, and by whom? The air in the warehouse felt heavier still, laden not just with the stench of decay, but with the weight of human cruelty and complex colonial entanglements. Holmes turned from the ruined rubber, his gaze already looking beyond the immediate horror, the faint sounds of the docks outside barely penetrating the gloom. "Our first step, Watson," he announced, his tone brisk once more, "must be to speak with the unfortunate Sir Charles Harrington. His perspective, however clouded by financial distress, may yet shed some light on the enemies he has doubtless made." Following Lady Beatrice Foxglove's urgent summons, Holmes and I soon found ourselves before the imposing Portland stone building housing Sir Charles Harrington's offices. The roar of London's traffic seemed to diminish as we stepped into a lobby of polished marble and dark, gleaming mahogany. A liveried attendant, silent as a wraith, conducted us upwards. The smooth ascent of the mechanical lift was a testament to modern commerce. Sir Charles's private office was a temple to industry and empire. It was vast and oak-paneled. Maps of Africa dominated one wall, their territories painted in bold, possessive colors. The air was thick with expensive cigars and old leather. Apart from our hushed entry, the only sound was the solemn tick-tock of a grand long-case clock. Each beat seemed to measure the seconds of Harrington's dwindling fortune. "Sir Charles, may I present Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson. Gentlemen, this is Sir Charles Harrington, who has suffered so grievously from these unfortunate occurrences," responded Lady Beatrice Foxglove. "Lady Beatrice, Holmes, Watson, a damnable business. Ruin, gentlemen, stares me in the face. Entire shipments worthless. The East Africa Trading Company bleeds profits," Sir Charles Harrington said. He slammed a fist on his great mahogany desk, punctuating his words. The sound was startlingly loud in the quiet room. Sir Charles Harrington was a man built on a grand scale, much like his office. He was broad-shouldered, with a florid complexion from rich living. Yet his small, sharp eyes darted with a restless energy that contradicted his imposing frame. His voice, when he first acknowledged us with a curt nod, was a low rumble. It was accustomed to command, yet frayed at the edges. A heavy gold watch chain was strung across his ample waistcoat. He paced before a vast window overlooking the bustling city. The grey light did little to soften the harsh lines of anxiety around his mouth. I noted a nearly empty brandy decanter on a nearby credenza. "Sir Charles, you mentioned occurrences." Lady Beatrice has suggested the possibility of deliberate sabotage. What is your own view on the origin of this blight? Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes's voice was calm, a stark contrast to Harrington's agitation. His gaze remained fixed on the investor. Sabotage, preposterous, native superstition more like, or incompetence. Sheer, bloody incompetence from those dolts at the plantations or on the ships. I pay good money for reliable men, and this is the result, said Sir Charles Harrington. Harrington scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. The sound was like shifting gravel, and his face flushed a deeper red. I glanced towards Lady Beatrice. Her expression was carefully composed, yet I fancied I saw a flicker of disappointment, a silent counterpoint to Sir Charles's bluster, reinforcing her initial grave concerns that had brought us here. This talk of curses and grievances is sentimental nonsense. We bring civilization, progress, remarked Sir Charles Harrington. Holmes remained impassive, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly as he leaned forward. Harrington's hand, resting on a stack of ledgers, clenched at the word grievances. His knuckles whitened, a faint tremor running through his arm, a detail I might have missed were I not attuned to Holmes's methods of observation. In the silence that followed, the clock's ticking seemed to grow louder, marking each moment of tension. And yet, Sir Charles, these occurrences are remarkably consistent and thorough in their destruction. Such complete ruin suggests a method, does it not? Incompetence is often haphazard. This blight is precise, replied Sherlock Holmes. Method? Bah, it's a plague, a contagion. What method is there in disease? It spreads, man. The financial implications. That's what truly concerns me. The stability of our entire colonial venture hangs in the balance, Mr. Holmes, Sir Charles Harrington said. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. His voice lost some of its bluster, becoming strained. Holmes's gaze drifted from Harrington to a meticulously detailed map of East African territories hanging behind the desk. His eyes lingered on a specific region, marked with small, almost invisible pinpricks. He then glanced at a heavy, carved ivory letter opener lying askew on the blotter. It looked as if it had been recently and agitatedly handled. Indeed, the financial implications are severe. Yet, your agitation, Sir Charles, seems to go beyond mere monetary loss. Lady Beatrice spoke of your wife's profound distress, a concern that evidently weighs heavily upon her, and I suspect, upon you. The pinpricks on your map are concentrated around the Ubakala province, a region known for recent unrest, I believe. And this letter opener, I observe its point has been pressed repeatedly into your blotter with considerable force. These are not the actions of a man merely frustrated by logistics. Perhaps you are wrestling with a more personal threat, one that touches your household directly, declared Sherlock Holmes. A heavy silence fell, broken only by Harrington's suddenly audible breathing. The color drained from his face, leaving his florid complexion mottled and pale. He stared at Holmes, not with anger, but with a dawning, unwilling comprehension. The distant clatter of a horse-drawn omnibus from the street below seemed to emphasize the tension. Personal threat, that is an exaggeration, Mr. Holmes. Naturally, one has enemies in business, but this is about the cargo, the blight. Sir Charles Harrington answered. He stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He avoided Holmes's direct gaze, his eyes flicking towards the decanter. Holmes rose, signaling that the interview was, for now, at its end. He had prized open a crack in Sir Charles's formidable facade. It revealed not just a worried investor, but a man burdened by something far heavier than spoiled rubber. Quite so, Sir Charles. The blight is paramount. Its nature and origin are questions for a specialist. Watson, I believe our next stop must be Kew. A reputable botanist may shed light where commerce and colonial maps cannot, deduced Sherlock Holmes. His tone was brisk, already focused on the next step. As we left and descended into the noisy London streets, Sir Charles Harrington's oppressive, opulent office felt a world away. The investor's fear, however, lingered in my mind. Holmes was silent for a time, his brow furrowed in thought. It was clear this cursed cargo was only the surface of a much deeper and possibly far more dangerous mystery. The prospect of consulting the experts at Kew Gardens offered a new scientific path. I was eager to see what answers botany might hold. Following our unsettling interview with Sir Charles Harrington, whose claims of mere financial worry seemed hollow, Holmes announced our destination, the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. The handsome ride offered a refreshing change from London's grim opulence to Kew's verdant tranquility. Even from the lane, the soft rustling of leaves and the distant clang of a gardener's spade reached us, a balm to the case's anxieties. We were ushered into a bright, cool laboratory, sunlight streaming through its large glass panes. The air was rich with the scents of damp earth, exotic pollens, and the clean tang of chemicals. Benches displayed gleaming microscopes and ordered botanical specimens. The quiet hiss of a Bunsen burner and the occasional crisp turn of a page were the only sounds in this sanctuary of science, far removed from Sir Charles's grasping commerce. Dr. Alina Ainsworth greeted us. She was a woman of perhaps 30 years, her intelligent, observant eyes conveying quiet dedication. Her voice, clear and measured, betrayed a mind accustomed to precision. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I have the samples you sent. An intriguing blight, most certainly. I have conducted a preliminary examination," responded Dr. Alina Ainsworth. She gestured towards a series of Petri dishes and a microscope. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with that familiar, piercing intensity. "And your conclusions, Doctor," deduced Sherlock Holmes, "based upon the morphology of the fungal hyphae and the nature of the necrotic lesions," Dr. Ainsworth explained with professional confidence. "It appears to be a particularly aggressive, though naturally occurring, Phytophthora strain. Such blights, while devastating, are not unknown in tropical cultivars under stress," Dr. Alina Ainsworth replied. A small measure of disappointment settled upon me. If it were merely a natural affliction, our involvement seemed at an end. Holmes, however, remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed upon the slides. The only sound in the stillness was the faint, metallic ticking of a clock on the wall. Holmes straightened, his voice thoughtful. "Natural, you say, Dr. Ainsworth. And yet, consider the pattern of spoilage described in the manifests. Uniformly rapid, affecting entire shipments within days. Most natural blights exhibit a more variable progression, do they not? Some pockets of resistance, some slower decay," Sherlock Holmes noted. A slight furrow appeared on Dr. Ainsworth's brow. Her voice lost a fraction of its earlier assurance. "That is generally true, yes. This strain does appear unusually virulent," replied Dr. Alina Ainsworth. Holmes continued, his finger tapping a diagram she had prepared. "And the spore distribution. You note here a remarkably even dispersal across samples taken from disparate parts of the cargo hold. One might expect concentrations, clusters, following air currents, or points of initial infection. This suggests an almost premeditated inoculation," Sherlock Holmes responded. Dr. Ainsworth shifted uncomfortably, the scientific papers in her hand rustling like dry leaves. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, defensiveness, or perhaps a dawning, unwelcome unease. Her reply was a little too quick, a little too definite. Unusual, perhaps, but not impossible. Environmental factors within a ship's hold could account for such phenomena, Dr. Alina Ainsworth replied. Holmes pressed on, his tone deceptively mild, yet a keen ear could detect the underlying challenge. "Indeed, and its resistance. You mention attempts to treat samples with standard copper-based fungicides proved ineffective," observed Sherlock Holmes. She nodded, her voice now perceptibly strained, the composure she had worn beginning to fray. "Completely ineffective, Mr. Holmes, which again points to a highly resilient natural variant." Dr. Alina Ainsworth said. Holmes mused, his gaze sweeping the laboratory, lingering on the ordered specimens as if seeking an unseen presence, or a variant specifically cultivated or selected for such resilience. Tell me, Doctor, is there any research presently being conducted, here or elsewhere, into the deliberate weaponization of such plant pathogens, or perhaps their accelerated evolution? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Dr. Ainsworth paled slightly, her composure visibly shaken. A tense silence filled the room as Holmes' question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The once serene laboratory now seemed to bristle with unseen menace. Her voice, though low, trembled almost imperceptibly. Such research would be ethically unconscionable, Mr. Holmes. Kew Gardens would never entertain such a notion, said Dr. Alina Ainsworth. Holmes offered a curt nod, though his keen eyes remained searching. He had planted a seed of doubt, not only in our minds, but, I suspected, deep within Dr. Ainsworth's scientific certainty. The purely natural explanation was beginning to fray at the edges, revealing unsettling possibilities. Quite. My thanks for your expert assessment, Dr. Ainsworth. It has been most illuminating, explained Sherlock Holmes. He paused, then his voice took on a new gravity as he turned to me. This blight, Watson, has characteristics that speak less of nature's caprice and more of human artifice. Our investigation must now turn to the human element, to those who might possess both the motive and the specialized knowledge. Lady Beatrice Foxglove mentioned a gentleman recently arrived from East Africa, one who might shed light on the conditions there. I believe our next conversation should be with him, remarked Sherlock Holmes. With that, Holmes turned, and we took our leave. The sunlit laboratory, once fragrant with exotic blooms, now seemed tinged with an acrid aroma of suspicion. The scientific dedication we first perceived felt, on our departure, like a veneer over troubling currents. The previous day's unsettling visit to Kew Gardens, with its lingering questions of manipulated science, had left Holmes in a contemplative mood. Our hansom clattered to a halt before an elegant Mayfair residence. The subdued gleam of gaslight upon its polished brass knocker indicating the home of Lady Beatrice Foxglove. A liveried footman admitted us, his movements hushed, and the distant, gentle chime of a grandfather clock was the only sound that disturbed the opulent quiet of the hallway. Lady Beatrice received us in her drawing-room, a space furnished with a refined taste that spoke of both wealth and intellect. The air was faintly scented with beeswax and dried flowers. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, her expression kindly yet marked by a certain gravity. Beside her, seated rather stiffly upon a damask chair, was a gentleman of striking appearance. He was dark-skinned, his features finely chiseled, and he wore European attire with an air of dignified discomfort. This, I presumed, was Mr. David Arcoro. Her voice was melodious, though tinged with concern. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so promptly. This is Mr. Arcoro, of whom I spoke, responded Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Mr. Arcoro inclined his head, his gaze steady and direct. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, yet also a flicker of something resolute. He spoke with careful articulation, his English precise, his tone measured, but carrying an undercurrent of deeply suppressed emotion. It is an honor, Mr. Holmes. Lady Beatrice has assured me of your discretion and your unique abilities, remarked Mr. David Arcoro. Holmes, who had been observing Arcoro intently, nodded. Lady Beatrice has outlined the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Sir Charles Harrington's shipments. Pray, tell us, Mr. Arcoro, from your perspective, what troubles the rubber plantations in your homeland, declared Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Arcoro's hands, which had been resting on his knees, tightened into fists for a moment before he consciously relaxed them. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder in the ensuing silence. His voice gained a slight tremor, a hint of the passion held in check. Troubles, Mr. Holmes. It is more than trouble, Mr. David Arcoro said. A shadow crossed Arcoro's face, his earlier composure momentarily fractured by the intensity of his feeling. It is a wound upon our land and our people. Sir Charles Harrington's East Africa Trading Company, they speak of progress, of bringing civilization, responded Mr. David Arcoro. His voice, though still controlled, vibrated with a deep, resonant anger as he continued. What they bring is servitude. Our ancestral lands are seized, our men forced to toil under conditions no Englishman would endure for a single day. The quotas for rubber are impassable, the punishments for failing to meet them brutal, remarked Mr. David Arcoro. He paused, and I saw his gaze drift towards the window, as if seeing not the London street, but some distant, sun-scorched landscape. Lady Beatrice watched him with an expression of profound sympathy. The soil itself cries out, Mr. Holmes. Arcoro's voice trembled with passion. We have always lived in harmony with the land, understanding its rhythms, its needs. But the company, remarked Mr. David Arcoro. He paused, his fists clenching. They carve vast tracts, heedless of our ancient ways. They plant where the earth is unwilling, take without giving back. His tone softened, tinged with reverence. There is a plant, the mukuyu vine, sacred to our elders. Its roots bind the soil, its leaves offer shade. Yet they tear it out, for it impedes their regimented rows of rubber trees. Bitterness crept into his words. They do not understand that what they call weeds are often the land's guardians, responded Mr. David Arcoro. I noted the intensity with which he spoke of this mukuyu vine. It seemed to hold a particular significance beyond its mere botanical properties. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his eyes glinting. This blight, Mr. Arcoro, which spoils the rubber, have you any knowledge of such a phenomenon occurring naturally in your region? Or perhaps any local beliefs or legends that might touch upon such a curse? Sherlock Holmes responded. Mr. Arcoro looked down at his hands again. A conflict was clearly visible upon his face, a reluctance to speak further, warring with a desire for justice. The fine ticking of the clock seemed to mark the passage of his internal struggle. He replied slowly, his voice now barely above a whisper. There are stories, whispers among my people, replied Mr. David Arcoro. He seemed to choose his words with immense care, each one heavy with unspoken meaning, his gaze fixed on his hands. Some say the land itself is retaliating against the desecration, that the spirits of the ancestors are angered, Mr. David Arcoro said. He paused, then added with emphasis, but as for a specific blight like this, no, not in this manner. Not with this unnatural speed and virulence, said Mr. David Arcoro. His visible distress was palpable. It was clear he carried a heavy burden, torn between loyalty to his people's suffering and perhaps a fear of implicating them, or of revealing knowledge that might be misconstrued. Holmes rose, his manner brisk yet not unkind. Your testimony has been most valuable, Mr. Arcoro, observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his keen gaze fixed on the troubled man. You speak of overseers and company men. Is there any individual who might possess intimate knowledge of the plantation's operations? Perhaps, he added carefully, someone no longer in the company's employ. Someone who might have seen things or heard things. Mr. Arcoro hesitated, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The name, however, remained unspoken, hanging in the air as our interview concluded. As we took our leave, the scent of beeswax seemed to mingle with a more ethereal, troubling essence, the unspoken weight of injustice. Holmes was silent for the first few minutes in the cab, then he turned to me, his expression thoughtful. The mukuyu vine, Watson. Interesting, declared Sherlock Holmes. He tapped his long fingers together, a familiar sign of his mind actively piecing together disparate facts. And Arcoro's reluctance to name a specific individual suggests a complex web of loyalties and fears, declared Sherlock Holmes. Our next step, I believe, he continued, his voice crisp with purpose, is to find someone who has experienced the workings of Harrington's enterprise from the inside, perhaps someone with a grievance of their own, explained Sherlock Holmes. A disgraced overseer, perhaps, if such a man can be found, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. His words were a clear directive, and I knew our inquiries would soon take us from the refined drawing rooms of Mayfair to altogether different locales. The search for a disgruntled former employee of the East Africa Trading Company had begun. Our pursuit of Captain James Blackwood, following the unsettling interview with Mr. Okoro, led us deep into the labyrinthine warrens of the East End. The hansom cab deposited us at the mouth of a narrow, ill-lit alley, the air thick with the competing odors of stale beer, brine, and unidentifiable refuse. A battered sign, creaking mournfully with each gust of wind from the nearby Thames, proclaimed our destination. The Mariner's Rest. It was, by all appearances, anything but restful. Inside, a cacophony assaulted the ears. The roar of coarse laughter, the sharp clatter of tankards upon rough-hewn tables, and the discordant strains of a concertina battling a drunken chorus filled the smoke-laden atmosphere. The floor was slick with spilt liquor and sawdust of questionable origin. Holmes, ever unperturbed, navigated the throng with an almost spectral ease, his keen eyes scanning each shadowy alcove. He paused before a table in the darkest corner, where a man sat slumped, a half-empty bottle of gin his sole companion. His clothes, once of decent quality, were now stained and rumpled, his face unshaven and bearing the pallor of one long acquainted with misfortune and strong spirits. This, I surmised, was our disgraced captain. His voice, though low, cut through the surrounding din with surprising clarity. Captain James Blackwood, I presume, deduced Sherlock Holmes. The man started, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. He squinted at Holmes, then at me, a flicker of something suspicion, perhaps, or mere drunken bewilderment crossing his features. A low growl rumbled in his chest before he spoke. His voice was a gravelly rasp. And who might be asking? More of Harrington's hounds, come to hound a ruined man, Captain James Blackwood replied. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my associate, Dr. Watson. We are not connected with Sir Charles Harrington, save for an interest in the recent misfortunes concerning his East African shipments, replied Sherlock Holmes. Blackwood let out a harsh, barking laugh that drew a few curious glances from nearby patrons. He took a long pull from his bottle, the raw spirit seeming to fuel his bitterness rather than soothe it. Misfortunes, answered Captain James Blackwood. Blackwood spat. Aye, Harrington's had his share. Serves him right, the sanctimonious devil. Ruined me, he did, said Captain James Blackwood. He took another swig. Said I was negligent. Negligent. His own penny-pinching left the cargo holds vulnerable as a babe in a lion's den. Crates stacked any which way, no proper dunnage, ventilation an afterthought. Any rot could spread like wildfire, curse or no curse. So you believe the spoilage was due to poor handling then, not some external malevolence, explained Sherlock Holmes. He slammed his fist on the table, making the bottle jump. Malevolence. There's malevolence aplenty out there, make no mistake. But this blight, it was too quick, too thorough, said Captain James Blackwood. His eyes, though bloodshot, held a glint of conviction or perhaps fear. He leaned in, his voice dropping slightly, though still audible over the din. I told them. I told them the conditions on the quay were ripe for trouble. The local tallymen, always looking for a way to skim a bit, leaving crates open to the elements for hours, sometimes overnight. Easy enough for something to be introduced, wouldn't you say? Said Captain James Blackwood. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. I noticed a subtle tightening around his lips, a sign I had come to recognize when a particular thread caught his interest. Introduced, Captain, that is a strong word. What precisely do you mean by it? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. Blackwood waved a dismissive hand, his bravado momentarily faltering. Ah, what do I know? I'm just a drunken sailor, ain't I? But I saw things, heard whispers, the natives. They ain't happy. Harrington squeezed 'em too hard. Some of 'em know plants, herbs, things that can do more harm than a white man dreams of. Captain James Blackwood answered. He trailed off, staring into his gin as if seeking answers in its murky depths. The clamour of the tavern seemed to recede as Holmes considered the captain's words. I saw Holmes note the slight hesitation, the shift in Blackwood's eyes when he mentioned the natives. A flicker of fear, perhaps, or a deeper knowledge he was unwilling to fully divulge. Indeed, your insight, Captain, despite your current circumstances, is most illuminating. You speak of lax security, of opportunities for contamination both accidental and deliberate, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, his gaze unwavering, allowing his words to settle upon the captain. The air between them seemed to crackle, despite the surrounding noise. And yet, you attribute your dismissal solely to Harrington's parsimony, not to any failure to prevent such an introduction yourself. An interesting omission. Blackwood flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth to retort, then seemed to think better of it, sinking back into a sullen silence. The fight appeared to drain out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. The raucous noise of the tavern swelled once more to fill the void. Holmes rose, coins clinking as he placed them on the table that more than covered the captain's drink. He gave a slight nod, more to himself than to the defeated man before us, and then turned towards the exit. As we threaded our way through the throng, the tavern's cacophony gradually faded. Stepping into the alley, the comparatively fresh air was a relief. From the river came the distant, melancholy clang of a ship's bell. A bitter man, Holmes. But do you credit his tale of lax security? Wondered Dr. John Watson. We walked in silence for a few moments, the sounds of our footsteps echoing faintly in the alley before we reached the slightly wider, cobbled street that led towards the main thoroughfare. Holmes finally broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. His bitterness is genuine, Watson, as is, I suspect, much of his account of the cargo handling. He inadvertently confirmed the vulnerability, replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused as we turned onto a busier, gas-lit street, the clatter of a late-night carriage momentarily interrupting his thoughts. Yet his reticence regarding the nature of the threat and his pointed deflection when pressed suggests he knows more than he admits or fears to admit. This blight, so swift and specific, it speaks of a cultivated agent, stated Sherlock Holmes. A cultivated agent. The words hung in the air, keavy with implication. Our next step, therefore, is clear. We must consult an expert in the less conspicuous forms of botanical warfare. Kew Gardens, I think, and a certain Dr. Ainsworth might hold the next piece of our puzzle, though perhaps a second, more specialized opinion on fungi would be prudent. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Following our unsettling interview with Captain Blackwood, Holmes declared the necessity of a specialist's opinion. Thus, we found ourselves the next afternoon before a modest terraced house in a quiet Bloomsbury Square, the brass plate upon its door bearing the simple inscription, Dr. Alastair Finch, Mycology. The scrape of our boots on the steps was the only sound to break the genteel quiet of the street, punctuated perhaps by the distant clip-clop of a hansom cab. We were admitted by a solemn manservant, his footsteps echoing softly on a polished hall floor, into a laboratory that occupied the entire rear of the ground floor. It was a space filled with the sharp, clean scent of carbolic acid and damp earth, a stark contrast to the stale beer and desperation of the previous day's tavern. Glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls, their contents, specimens in jars, dimly visible through the glass. Benches were cluttered with microscopes, slides, and intricate brass instruments that gleamed faintly in the subdued light. A low, rhythmic ticking, like a metallic heartbeat, came from some unseen apparatus in the corner. Dr. Finch, a man of perhaps 50, with a high forehead and keen, spectacled eyes, greeted us with a curt nod. He was surrounded by the tools of his obscure science, and his manner was that of one for whom the world of men held less fascination than the unseen universe of spores and hyphae. The air around him seemed to hum with unspoken knowledge. Holmes, ever direct, wasted no time. His voice was brisk, cutting through the laboratory's quiet. "Dr. Finch, I presume. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. We have come upon a matter of some urgency involving a peculiar blight affecting shipments of raw rubber from East Africa." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The mycologist replied, his voice as dry and rustling as preserved parchment. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes. I have read some cursory reports. You have a sample, I trust," Dr. Alastair Finch replied. Holmes produced a small, lead-lined box. From it, he carefully extracted a piece of the afflicted rubber, its surface marred by the sinister, rapidly spreading decay we had come to know. Dr. Finch took it with delicate precision, his gaze already intent. He carried it to a powerfully illuminated workbench, the only sounds for several minutes being the minute click and slide of his instruments as he prepared a specimen, a soft, metallic whisper in the stillness. I watched, fascinated, as he peered through his microscope, his brow furrowed in concentration. The laboratory's silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the soft hiss of a gas lamp and the muted heartbeat of London beyond the walls. Holmes stood motionless, his eyes fixed upon the mycologist, his expression unreadable. At length Dr. Finch straightened, his face grave. He murmured almost to himself, "Remarkable," then addressed Holmes directly, his tone sharpened with academic certainty, a stark contrast to the earlier dryness. "This is no naturally occurring phenomenon, Mr. Holmes. The fungal strain responsible for this devastation is cultivated." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. I felt a familiar frisson, the chilling touch of deliberate malice, artificially propagated, and I should venture, significantly enhanced for virulence. Dr. Alastair Finch replied, "Sabotage confirmed, then, and of a most sophisticated and malevolent nature." My earlier unease regarding Captain Blackwood intensified. Holmes's voice, when he spoke, was quiet, yet charged with an intensity that seemed to draw all focus towards him. "Cultivated, you say? Can you determine its precise nature, or perhaps its origin?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Finch returned to his microscope, adjusting a slide. The delicate scrape of glass on glass was a tiny, sharp sound in the expectant quiet. "The spore's structure is extraordinary," responded Dr. Alastair Finch. His voice quickened with academic excitement, and he tapped a long finger against the brass of the microscope as he elaborated. "While reminiscent of tropical species, this variant bears the unmistakable hallmarks of highly specialized, traditional cultivation techniques. Methods I have encountered in ethnographic records detailing the botanical practices of certain indigenous communities in the very East African territories you mentioned." Dr. Alastair Finch answered. A new layer of understanding settled in the quiet laboratory, the ticking clock in the corner seeming to mark the seconds of revelation. "It suggests a knowledge far removed from European science, but deeply potent nonetheless. To pinpoint its precise origin, or indeed the specific community possessing this knowledge, would necessitate a deep dive into colonial botanical archives. We would need to meticulously search through records from the East Africa Trading Company itself, perhaps, or the official colonial administration. These archives often contain detailed surveys of indigenous flora, notes on local uses of plants, and sometimes even documented traditional preparations. We'd be looking for any mention of fungi with unusual properties, or cultivation techniques that match what we see here, cross-referencing these with ethnographic accounts of the region's botanical practices," responded Dr. Alastair Finch. "A formidable task, Dr. Finch. Such records are often vast, and the crucial details buried deep. But if it leads us to the source, it is a path we must tread, stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's eyes gleamed. This was no random act of malice. It was targeted, drawing upon unique, localized knowledge. The pieces were beginning to align with a terrible clarity. The audacity of it struck me. I exclaimed, my voice perhaps a little louder than intended in the scholarly quiet. Good heavens, but how could such a thing be deployed against entire shipments? Dr. John Watson said. Dr. Finch adjusted his spectacles, his expression thoughtful. The rhythmic ticking from the unseen apparatus seemed to underscore his careful deliberation as he considered the practicalities of such an attack. Given its rapid sporulation and resilience, a concentrated inoculum introduced at a strategic point within the cargo hold, perhaps via a seemingly innocuous object, or even a fine aerosol dispersed amongst the bales, would suffice. Dr. Alistair Finch answered. He looked from Holmes to me, his gaze steady, ensuring we grasped the insidious simplicity of it. Once established, its spread would be swift and inexorable, especially in the close, humid conditions of a ship's journey. The darkness and damp would be its allies. Dr. Alistair Finch answered. Holmes nodded slowly, absorbing every word. The mycologist's analysis had not only confirmed his suspicions, but had provided a tangible thread, a botanical clue leading back towards the source of this insidious warfare. His voice, when he finally spoke, had regained its customary crispness, the earlier intensity now channeled into focused resolve. Your expertise has been invaluable, Dr. Finch. You have illuminated a very dark path, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. As we took our leave and the heavy front door clicked shut behind us, the sounds of the quiet Bloomsbury Square, a distant dog's bark, the rattle of a milk cart seemed sharper, more defined than before. Holmes remained silent for several paces, his gaze distant, fixed on some point beyond the London rooftops. Then he turned to me, a grim light in his eyes. The everyday sounds of the city seemed to recede as he began to outline his thoughts. Sir Watson, the blight is a weapon, meticulously crafted from knowledge rooted in East Africa. This significantly narrows our field, does it not? He paused, his gaze sweeping the street as if searching for unseen adversaries, before continuing. Our disgraced Captain Blackwood, with his recent return from that very region and his undeniable access to the cargo, he becomes an even more compelling nexus in this affair. We must ascertain, and quickly, if he carried more than just bitterness back to England. Sherlock Holmes said. The implication was chillingly clear, and a sense of keen anticipation for Holmes's next move settled upon me. The hunt, with all its intricate dangers, was truly on. The chill wind whipping off the Thames, a familiar London greeting, carried with it the raw scent of salt and tar and the ceaseless clangor of the docks. I watched cranes groan under their burdens and listened to the shouts of stevedores echoing across the greasy cobbles as Holmes, and I made our way towards the gaunt edifice of the customs house. My companion, I noted, seemed impervious to the biting air, his focus entirely on the task ahead. Indeed, the previous day's revelations from the mycologist had lent a grim urgency to our pursuit that even I felt keenly. His voice was brisk, cutting through the dark-side cacophony. Captain Blackwood, Watson, returned to England under a considerable cloud. The repeated ruination of Sir Charles Harrington's cargo, coupled with Blackwood's recent and somewhat precipitous departure from East Africa, will have undoubtedly piqued the interest of His Majesty's customs, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Indeed, they are empowered to impound the effects of individuals suspected of involvement in irregular shipping matters. I anticipate little resistance. It was as Holmes had predicted. A brief but firm exchange ensued at the customs house counter. I observed the stout, uniformed official's initial bluster. It swiftly crumpled before Holmes's quiet authority and an oblique reference to matters of national importance. Consequently, we were ushered into a dusty, gas-lit repository. The air within, I found, was heavy with the scent of old paper and confiscated goods, a rather cheerless place. Only the scratching of a quill from an adjacent office broke the oppressive silence. The official, a man named Higgs, spoke with a grudging deference. Captain Blackwood's trunk and personal valise arrived on the Sea Serpent 2 days past. Been here pending inquiries, sir, as you suggested they might be, responded dark official. The official gestured towards a battered seaman's chest and a smaller leather bag. Then, to my relief, discreetly withdrew, the thud of his retreating footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. Holmes, naturally, wasted no time. He knelt before the chest, his long fingers deftly probing the locks, which, true to his earlier assertion, were not overly secured. As the hinges creaked open, a faint aroma of camphor drifted out, mingled with something else, something vaguely earthy, and I confess, rather unsettling to my senses. For what seemed an age, though in truth it was perhaps a quarter of an hour, I watched as Holmes meticulously sifted through the contents. Rough-spun clothes, a sextant, charts of the East African coast, a worn copy of Defoe, the typical effects of a seaman, it appeared. Then, from the valise, amongst shaving tackle and a few personal letters, he extracted a small, unassuming wooden box, of the sort I knew was often used for botanical specimens. He opened it with infinite care. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried moss, were several small, desiccated leaves, and what appeared to my eye to be a fine, dark powder. It was then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Holmes's lips, that rare flicker of quiet triumph I had come to recognize so well. "Good heavens, Holmes," I whispered, leaning in closer, "could that be the very substance we seek?" commented Dr. John Watson. He nodded, his grey eyes alight with understanding. "Indeed, Watson. Our mycologist friend described the weaponized fungal strain with remarkable precision." Sherlock Holmes responded. He produced his pocket lens, directing my attention to the box's contents. "Observe these microscopic particles. They match his description perfectly. These are the very spores responsible for the blight," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He rose, brushing a speck of dust from his knee with characteristic neatness. The discovery, stark and undeniable, lay before us, and I felt a shiver of anticipation for the explanation I knew would follow. His tone was measured, each word falling into place with chilling clarity. "The presence of these spores in Captain Blackwood's personal effects establishes a direct, physical link between him and the means of this elaborate sabotage," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "But the chain, Watson, extends further. You recall Mr. Arcoro's testimony regarding the unique flora of his homeland and the traditional uses of certain plants by his community." I nodded, my mind instantly recalling the dignified African, Mr. Arcoro, and his earnest account of his people's knowledge. Holmes, I saw, continued to fix his gaze upon the damning evidence in the box, his expression one of intense concentration. Following the mycologist's suggestion, I consulted colonial botanical archives and relevant colonial reports. I pictured Holmes, tireless in his pursuit, poring over dusty tomes while the city slept. He continued, his gaze still fixed on the damning evidence. "The specific characteristics of this cultivated fungus, its aggressive propagation, the particular organic medium in which these residual spores are found, all point unequivocally to a preparation method known only to a very specific group within Mr. Arcoro's region," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "A traditional knowledge, Watson, perverted for a destructive purpose. Blackwood, having spent years there, would have had ample opportunity to learn of it, or perhaps to coerce someone who possessed such knowledge." Sherlock Holmes responded. I felt a chill as the full scope of the betrayal dawned on me. This was no mere local affair, but a web of exploitation stretching from the heart of Africa to our very shores. Blackwood might be the immediate culprit, but the roots of this treachery, I realized, ran far deeper and darker. He closed the specimen box with a decisive snap. Blackwood is our immediate agent, certainly, but the web, I suspect, is more complex than it first appears, remarked Sherlock Holmes. There is one person who may yet illuminate the darker corners of this affair. Dr. Alina Ainsworth, the botanist at Kew. Her initial assessment of this blight was, shall we say, conveniently misleading. It is time we paid her a visit, deduced Sherlock Holmes. With those decisive words from Holmes, the dim light of the customs house seemed to recede, almost as if the case itself were propelling us forward. The prospect of our next confrontation, this time amidst the usually scholarly quiet of Kew Gardens, loomed large in my mind, and I confess, I felt a mixture of apprehension and eagerness to see how Holmes would navigate this new challenge. Our path, leading from the grimy docks and the disquieting revelations about Captain Blackwood and Mr. Okoro, now guided us to the comparative tranquility of Kew Gardens. Here the air was cleaner, tinged with the scent of damp earth and myriad botanic lives. Yet the errand upon which Holmes was bent promised little peace for its subject. We were shown into Dr. Alina Ainsworth's office. It was a room lined with books and curious specimens, its scholarly silence broken only by the distant, rhythmic click of shears from somewhere in the gardens. Dr. Ainsworth, your official report on the blight affecting Sir Charles Harrington's rubber shipments attributed the cause to a naturally occurring, albeit aggressive, fungal strain. Is that correct? Sherlock Holmes noted. A woman of perhaps 35, Dr. Ainsworth possessed intelligent eyes, now clouded with apprehension as she gestured towards a chair. Through her hand, as she made the gesture, ran a faint tremor. Even the usually sharp scent of chemicals seemed dulled by the palpable tension pervading the small room. It is, Mr. Holmes. My examination pointed to no other conclusion at the time, remarked Dr. Alina Ainsworth. Leaning forward slightly, Holmes kept his gaze fixed upon her face. From outside, a bird's brief trill punctuated the air, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere within the office. And yet, Doctor, subsequent, more thorough examinations have revealed a cultivated variant, one specifically designed for rapid propagation and destruction. A variant, I might add, that bears little resemblance to any naturally occurring blight known to Kew. Sherlock Holmes responded. Visibly, Dr. Ainsworth's composure fractured. A hitched breath, a sudden rise. She walked to the window, turning her back to us. With her sudden movement, the starched fabric of her blouse rustled. Her unsteady breathing became the sole sound in the room for a long moment. They made it clear what would happen if I pursued any other line of inquiry, responded Dr. Alina Ainsworth. She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. My work, my position here at Kew, everything I have striven for, Dr. Alina Ainsworth replied. A glance passed between Holmes and myself. Though his expression remained unreadable, his attention was fixed entirely upon the distressed botanist. They, doctor, be precise. Who are they? Replied Sherlock Holmes. Turning, she revealed a pale face and pleading eyes. From a nearby desk, a sheaf of papers slipped, scattering with a soft whoosh across the floorboards, utterly unheeded. Officials from the East Africa Trading Company, men close to Sir Charles Harrington, remarked Dr. Alina Ainsworth. She paused, twisting her hands, the words seemingly dragged from her with immense effort. They spoke of unfortunate consequences for Kew's funding, of my research being discredited. It was made abundantly clear that a natural disaster diagnosis was expected. Such a finding, they argued, would prevent public panic and avoid awkward questions for the colonial office. More than that, Mr. Holmes, it was strongly implied that a natural cause would facilitate a very substantial insurance claim for Sir Charles Harrington, a claim that sabotage would negate, remarked Dr. Alina Ainsworth. The scale of the deception unfolded before me, its audacity staggering. This was no mere matter of ruined cargo. No, It spoke of systemic corruption reaching into the very heart of the imperial enterprise. Slowly, Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled. Wrung from her under duress, the confession painted a grim picture, ambition and fear locked in collision with integrity. A most illuminating account, Dr. Ainsworth. You have been placed in an invidious position, declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his expression thoughtful rather than condemnatory, allowing his words to settle in the tense air of the office. However, the truth, like your blighted fungi, has a way of spreading. Watson, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He continued, turning to me, his voice regaining its customary briskness. Our inquiries now take us closer to the source of this malevolent cultivation. We must observe Mr. Arcoro and Captain Blackwood directly, declared Sherlock Holmes. As Holmes rose, I did likewise. By the window, Dr. Ainsworth remained, a solitary figure amidst her books and specimens, the weight of her compromise hanging heavy in the quiet room. Holmes's words implied a clandestine meeting, and the prospect of infiltrating it sent a familiar thrill of anticipation, mingled with no small measure of apprehension, coursing through me. The East End's miasma clung to us as Holmes led the way down a narrow, unlit alley, a potent brew of river damp, decay, and coal smoke. Each footfall on the slick cobbles seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, broken only by the distant, mournful hoot of a tug on the Thames. The warehouse loomed before us, a blacker silhouette against the faintly luminous fog. Holmes, ever the shadow, moved with a predator's grace, his hand gesturing me forward into the Stygian maw of a broken doorway. The air within was heavy, laden with the scent of stale spices, and something else, something acrid and faintly chemical. We trod carefully across the vast, dust-choked floor, the rotten timbers groaning softly under our weight. A rat scurried unseen in the darkness, its tiny claws a brief tattoo on the wooden planks. Holmes paused, his head cocked, listening intently. I held my breath, straining my own ears. I caught only the drip, drip, drip of water from some unseen leak, a monotonous counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. He pointed upwards towards a grimy catwalk that ran along one wall, half hidden in the gloom. His voice was a mere breath, yet sharp with purpose. Up there, Watson, our gallery seat for this grim performance, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The ascent was perilous, the iron rungs of the ladder cold and slippery. From our precarious perch, we commanded a view of the warehouse floor below. A single, sputtering gas lamp cast long, dancing shadows. It illuminated a small group of men huddled around a makeshift table fashioned from crates. The low murmur of their voices reached us, indistinct at first. Two figures soon dominated the hushed conference. I recognized Captain Blackwood instantly, his brutish frame hunched forward. Beside him, Mr. David Arcoro, though more slightly built, possessed an undeniable presence. His voice, when it rose a little, carried a tone of quiet conviction, though its burden was dark. Other, rougher-looking men formed a semicircle, listening intently. The air grew thick with their conspiracy. The new consignment arrives on the Empress of India next Tuesday. The refined culture must be introduced to the central hold, much as before. However, the dispersal agent, Captain, is now perfected. We've managed to micronize the carrier to an unprecedented degree, blending it with a charged organic compound. This new micropowder doesn't just settle, it actively clings, like a persistent, invisible mist, ensuring every fiber is exposed. The blight will take hold almost instantly, far more aggressively than with the cruder methods. It will ensure a more rapid, more complete contamination, answered Mr. David Arcoro. He spoke the last word with a discernible, grim satisfaction. Captain Blackwood shifted, his voice a gravelly rasp. And the dockyard watchman, Blackett. He's been asking too many questions. He needs to be discouraged. Permanently, if need be. This is too important to risk on loose talk, responded Captain James Blackwood. Prudence, Captain, not brutality, where it can be avoided. But the message must be clear. Harrington and his ilk will learn their avarice bears bitter fruit. This is no mere sabotage, but a strike at the heart of their exploitation. We'll send more shipments until they understand, replied Mr. David Arcoro. Holmes nudged me, his gaze fixed on a small, cork-stoppered vial Arcoro had placed upon the crate. Even from our distance, I could see the faint, ominous cloudiness of its contents. His whisper was cold as the iron rail beneath my hand. Observe, Watson, not merely a blight, but a weapon, meticulously prepared and refined. Dr. Ainsworth's manipulated research has borne bitter fruit indeed for Sir Charles. Sherlock Holmes responded. Suddenly, a floorboard directly beneath us creaked with an alarming loudness. Down below, heads snapped up. A burly ruffian, his face a mask of suspicion, detached himself from the group. He began to move towards the ladder, his boots thudding heavily. My blood ran cold. Holmes's tone brooked no argument, urgency replacing his earlier calm. Time to depart, Watson, and quickly. We scrambled back along the catwalk, the sound of our own hurried movements now a terrifying beacon. Behind us, a gruff shout echoed. Someone's up there. We half slid, half fell down the ladder on the far side of the warehouse, plunging into deeper darkness. Holmes flung open a rusted service door I hadn't noticed before, the screech of its hinges deafening in the sudden silence that followed the shout. We burst out into another narrow alleyway, the cold night air a welcome shock. Heavy footsteps pounded behind us, growing closer. Holmes veered sharply into an even narrower passage, little more than a fissure between two towering brick walls. We ran, stumbling over unseen refuse, the sounds of pursuit echoing confusingly around us. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chase seemed to falter, the shouts receding as our pursuers evidently chose the wrong turning in the labyrinthine warren. We emerged, breathless and disheveled, onto a slightly wider, fog-bound thoroughfare. The distant clang of a ship's bell from the river seemed to mark our escape. As we made our way westward, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, the full weight of what we had witnessed settled upon me. The cold, calculated nature of the conspiracy, the desperation that drove Arcoro, the ruthlessness of Blackwood. It was a dark tapestry woven from threads of injustice and revenge. Holmes walked beside me in silence, his brow furrowed in thought. I knew that look. The game was afoot, certainly, but the pieces on this board were stained with more than mere criminality. They spoke of profound moral quandaries that even my friend's keen intellect would find challenging to navigate. The fog seemed to press in, mirroring the complexities that lay ahead. The chill of the East End clung to us as we entered our Baker Street rooms. Our narrow escape left us weary, the fatigue settling deeper than mere physical exhaustion. A distant hansom clattered, its wheels muffled by damp air. Holmes' coat shed stood before the hearth. Firelight flickered on his sharp features. He was silent, lost in thought, wrestling with the implications of all we had witnessed. A desperate business, Holmes. Arcoro and Blackwood's methods are extreme. Such sabotage strikes at the heart of commerce, asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes turned slowly, his grey eyes thoughtful. The crackle of the coals in the grate was the only sound for a moment. Extreme, Watson. Perhaps, but consider Arcoro's grievances, the plight of his people. Can we condemn the fruit without examining the root? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. His voice lacked its usual clipped certainty, carrying a somber, questioning tone. I poured a small brandy. The decanter clinked loudly against the glass in the quiet room. But Holmes, the law is the law. One cannot simply take it into one's own hands. This blight, it could ruin countless innocents, not merely Harrington, responded Dr. John Watson. Is Harrington innocent, Watson? His fortune, by Arcoro's account, is built on suffering. The law often protects such systems. Our evidence, the blight knowledge, Arcoro's passion, Blackwood's bitterness points not to common criminals, but to men driven to extremes by injustice, Sherlock Holmes said. He paced, hands clasped behind him, a familiar habit when facing a thorny problem. Floorboards creaked under his tread. I watched, my thoughts in turmoil. The path of justice seemed lost in a moral fog as thick as any London might offer. So, what then? Do we stand by and allow this agricultural warfare to continue? Do we condone Arcoro's actions because his cause has merit? Dr. John Watson added. Holmes paused by the window, gazing out into the gaslit street. A newsboy's faint cry drifted up from below. Our role is not to condone, Watson, nor to simplify. We must understand. Arcoro uses his botanical knowledge for destruction. Dr. Ainsworth, in contrast, uses hers to combat such blights. Two sides of a coin, are they not? Both deeply connected to nature, yet one cultivates, the other corrupts. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He turned back to me, his expression resolute, the earlier uncertainty replaced by a focused intensity. The complexities are profound. If Arcoro is merely arrested, Harrington's injustices remain, festering. Yet Arcoro's destruction is indiscriminate. No, Watson, this is not a matter for a simple arrest. My heart quickened slightly. I recognized that tone in his voice. A decision had been forged in the crucible of his thoughts. What do you propose, Holmes? How does one navigate such a moral maze? Remarked Dr. John Watson. We must bring all parties into the light, Watson. Sir Charles Harrington, Mr. Arcoro, Captain Blackwood, and Dr. Ainsworth, whose expertise on this pestilence will be vital. Even Lady Foxglove, who first brought us this affair. The truth, in its entirety, must be laid bare before them all. Only then can we determine a course that seeks not just punishment, but a more comprehensive justice. Sherlock Holmes responded. He looked towards the mantelpiece, where our correspondence usually lay. His next words carried the weight of impending action. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall set the stage for a confrontation. It is time these shadows were dispelled, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The following afternoon found us assembled in the elegant Mayfair drawing-room of Lady Beatrice Foxglove. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick as the November fog that pressed against the tall windows, muffling the distant clatter of carriages on the street below. A sharp crackle from the hearth punctuated the silence as Sir Charles Harrington paced before the marble fireplace, his boots echoing faintly on the polished wood, his face a mask of ill-concealed agitation. Mr. Arcoro sat with a quiet dignity that seemed to reproach the room's opulence, whilst Captain Blackwood, by contrast, slouched in his chair, a brooding figure, his heavy breathing occasionally audible. Dr. Ainsworth, pale but resolute, occupied a seat near Lady Foxglove, who herself maintained a composed, observant silence. The only other sound for a time was the steady tick-tock of a rather ornate French clock upon the mantelpiece. "I have gathered you here," he began, his gaze sweeping across each individual, "because the threads of this unfortunate business, the spoilage of the East Africa Trading Company's rubber, converge upon all present." Sherlock Holmes responded. Sir Charles's voice rang out, sharp with indignation. "Preposterous, Holmes. This is a matter of incompetence, perhaps some foreign contamination. Not one of your fanciful drawing-room dramas," responded Sir Charles Harrington. Holmes merely inclined his head, a faint smile playing about his lips. "Let us begin with the blight itself," he continued, his tone even. He gestured towards a small, stoppered glass vial on a nearby mahogany table, its contents a faint, dark powder. "This vial, Watson, contains a concentrated sample of the very spores we found adhering to the remnants of the spoiled rubber, and later, in a more refined state, in Captain Blackwood's lodgings. Dr. Ainsworth, your initial research into aggressive fungal strains specific to certain tropical flora, though tragically misdirected by Q, proved invaluable once we engaged our own mycological expert. Its accuracy, when correctly interpreted, is undeniable. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes tapped the vial lightly with a fingertip, the small sound sharp in the expectant room. The blight is no accident of nature. It is a cultivated, targeted agent. Sherlock Holmes responded. Dr. Ainsworth nodded, her voice quiet but firm when she spoke. It is a highly aggressive variant, yes. Difficult to cultivate, impossible to encounter by chance in such a manner, responded Dr. Elena Ainsworth. Precisely. Holmes turned his gaze fully upon Mr. Arcoro, who met it steadily, and who possesses the botanical knowledge to identify and procure such an agent. Mr. Arcoro, your familiarity with the flora of your homeland, particularly the unique fungi of the Kalindi Highlands, a detail gleaned from our inquiries into your background and confirmed by your own unguarded remarks to Lady Beatrice, is extensive, replied Sherlock Holmes. A log shifted and settled in the fireplace, sending a brief shower of sparks upwards with a soft hiss. You came to London seeking justice for your people, driven to desperation by the conditions on Sir Charles's plantations, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Arcoro met Holmes's gaze directly, his expression sorrowful but unyielding. His voice, though soft, resonated with conviction. My people starve, Mr. Holmes. Their lands are stolen, their lives forfeit for rubber. What would you have us do? Plead with the wind, Mr. David Arcoro answered. A powerful motive. Holmes acknowledged Arcoro with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then his attention shifted, his keen eyes narrowing as they settled on Captain Blackwood. Yet, introducing such a blight onto a sealed cargo vessel requires more than knowledge. It requires access and a degree of ruthlessness, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The captain shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the old wood creaking in protest under his weight. Captain Blackwood, Holmes's voice was like chilled steel. Your dismissal from the East Africa Trading Company left you with a considerable grievance against Sir Charles. Your intimate knowledge of the shipping procedures made you the ideal instrument. More damningly, however, are the traces of the cultivated Kalindi spore found upon your sea chest, and within the very pipe you so carelessly smoked during our interview at your lodgings. The same unique spore, I might add, that we identified from the blighted cargo, replied Sherlock Holmes. Blackwood straightened, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. His reply was a low growl. Harrington deserved it. He and his kind, they bleed the colonies dry and call it enterprise. I saw what they did. What he did, Captain James Blackwood said. Harrington erupted, his voice shaking with fury. Lies, slander. This is a conspiracy against me. I demand you arrest these saboteurs, said Sir Charles Harrington. The true conspiracy, Sir Charles, Holmes stated, his voice hardening, the sound cutting through Harrington's outburst like a knife. The rhythmic tick-tock of the mantelpiece clock seemed to grow louder in the ensuing quiet, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, his gaze sweeping over them once more before continuing. The evidence shows that Mr. Arcoro identified the means. He gestured briefly towards the dignified African. Captain Blackwood provided the access. A similar gesture towards the scowling captain. And Dr. Ainsworth, unwittingly, confirmed the nature of the weapon, Sherlock Holmes noted. A small, sharp intake of breath from Dr. Ainsworth was clearly audible. Lady Beatrice, too, leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowed. The blight was introduced via contaminated packing materials, specifically the Hessian sacks in which the raw rubber was bundled. Microscopic examination of fibers from undamaged sacks, compared with those from the spoiled shipments, revealed the telltale presence of the spore deep within the weave, a detail overlooked in the initial panic. He paused again, letting his words sink in, the silence in the room now heavy with unspoken accusations and the weight of truth. Each of you played a part, driven by motives ranging from righteous anger to bitter revenge, all stemming from the inhumanity of your enterprise, Sir Charles, observed Sherlock Holmes. A heavy silence descended. The tick of the ornate clock seemed to grow louder, punctuated by a choked sob from Dr. Ainsworth. She covered her face with trembling hands. Sir Charles, once so full of bluster, now stood deflated, a sallow, defeated figure. Mr. Arcoro's gaze, fixed on the fallen magnate, held not triumph but a profound sadness. Lady Foxglove's eyes darted from one face to another, her brow furrowed with deep concern. Her voice trembled slightly. "I never intended, I only studied the disease," said Dr. Alina Ainsworth. "Indeed, Dr. Ainsworth, your contribution was academic, your knowledge tragically misused. The moral culpability, however, is a complex tapestry." He turned to me. "Watson, the hour grows late. There are individuals in positions of authority who must be apprised of these developments. The implications reach far beyond a spoiled cargo," declared Sherlock Holmes. I understood his meaning. This was no longer a simple case of sabotage, but a matter touching the very foundations of empire. The crackling of the fire in the grate seemed to underscore the gravity of his pronouncement, a small, domestic sound against the backdrop of immense, unseen forces. The next step, I knew, would take us into far deeper waters. The hansom deposited us before the solemn facade of the Diogenes Club in Pall Mall, a place where silence was not merely golden, but rigorously enforced. Within its hallowed halls, the usual quietude seemed deeper still, as if the very air was weighted with matters of grave import. A page, his soft footsteps barely disturbing the profound quiet, conducted us to a private chamber where Mycroft Holmes awaited, accompanied by two other gentlemen whose severe mien and watchful eyes bespoke their consequence in the hidden corridors of government. The only sounds within the room were the faint rustle of official-looking papers and the occasional, almost imperceptible, tick of a grandfather clock in the hall, while beyond the heavy drapes, the distant, muted clamor of London seemed a world away. His greeting was a mere inclination of the head, his voice, when it came, a low rumble. "Sherlock, Dr. Watson, you have news, I presume, regarding the unfortunate affair of the East Africa Trading Company," Mycroft Holmes answered. Holmes took the chair indicated, the slight sigh of its cushions the only sound accompanying his precise movements. His gaze swept once over Mycroft's companions before settling on his brother. He began without preamble, his tone level and clear. "The curse upon Harrington's cargo, Mycroft, was indeed sabotage," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Mycroft's expression remained impassive, though a flicker in his eyes acknowledged the gravity of the statement. The two officials beside him exchanged a swift, almost imperceptible glance, the subtle shift of their attention a silent question. Mr. David Arcoro, driven by the egregious injustices perpetrated upon his people in the colony, employed his profound botanical knowledge. Sherlock Holmes responded. Mycroft's gaze remained fixed on his brother, the silence in the room amplifying the weight of the revelation. One of the officials shifted slightly, the subtle sound of fabric against leather barely audible, a counterpoint to the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock from the hall. He cultivated a highly aggressive fungal strain, introducing it to the rubber shipments with the aid of a disgruntled Captain Blackwood, whose own grievances against Sir Charles Harrington made him a willing, if conflicted, accomplice. "The blight was nature's vengeance, artfully directed," remarked Sherlock Holmes. A palpable silence followed Holmes's concise report. One of the gentlemen shifted in his seat, the faint creak of leather piercing the stillness. Mycroft's fingers drummed lightly upon the arm of his chair, a rhythmic counterpoint to the hushed atmosphere, betraying his deep contemplation. "And Sir Charles Harrington?" he inquired, his voice edged with a weary cynicism. "His part in fostering such desperation," replied Mycroft Holmes. A faint, mirthless smile touched Holmes's lips. Harrington's brutal exploitation was the fertile ground upon which this entire tragedy grew. While not directly responsible for the sabotage, His actions were its undeniable catalyst, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the quiet room. The faint scent of old leather, beeswax, and pipe tobacco from some previous occupant seemed to intensify the somber mood. The confessions we obtained from both Arcoro and Blackwood leave no doubt as to the chain of causation, observed Sherlock Holmes. One of Mycroft's companions, a man with a deeply lined face and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of empires, spoke then, his voice a dry rasp. "This is a most delicate situation," Diogenes Club member said, the man's voice lowered to barely above a whisper. "Public exposure of Harrington's methods of the native unrest. It could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the stability of the colony, but for colonial confidence as a whole," said Diogenes Club member. He nodded slowly. "Precisely. The government will need to consider its response with utmost care. Justice for Mr. Arcoro's people is one thing, the integrity of the empire is another. Sometimes the greater good requires discretion," answered Mycroft Holmes. The discussion continued in this vein for some time, the low murmur of their voices a counterpoint to the weighty silence that often punctuated their measured words, each syllable seeming to echo in the grand chamber. The implications were vast and unsettling. It was clear that the truth Holmes had unearthed would likely be managed, its sharpest edges smoothed away by the expediencies of statecraft. As we finally rose to take our leave, the scrape of chairs against the parquet floor and the decisive click of the heavy door closing behind us did little to dispel the atmosphere in the room, which remained thick with unspoken complexities. The familiar clatter of our cab's wheels on the cobbled streets was a welcome sound after the oppressive quiet of the Diogenes Club. For a long while, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his gaze fixed on the passing gas lamps that painted fleeting streaks of light within the dim interior. "A grim business, Holmes," I ventured at last, "and one likely to see little true resolution if Mycroft's inclinations are any guide," commented Dr. John Watson. He turned his head, his eyes glinting in the gloom. "True resolution, Watson, is a rare commodity when the affairs of men clash with the ambitions of empires. Mr. Arcoro sought justice for his people, and in his own desperate way he achieved a form of it. Yet the blight he unleashed is but a symptom of a deeper malaise. This case, like so many others we have encountered, merely illuminates another facet of the shadows that empire casts, shadows of greed, of exploitation, of moral corrosion," replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves filling the silence before he continued, his voice softer now, almost melancholic. "Sir Charles Harrington will likely face some censure, perhaps a quiet diminishing of his influence. Mr. Arcoro may see some small improvements for his people, bought at a terrible cost. But the great, grinding machinery of colonial enterprise will roll on. It is a sobering thought, Watson, that for all our efforts to bring light to darkness, some shadows are so vast they defy true dispelling," Sherlock Holmes noted. And as we journeyed back towards Baker Street, the weight of his words settled upon me. The case of the cursed cargo was closed, yet the larger, more intricate puzzle of the empire's troubled soul remained, its pieces scattered across continents, its full picture visible perhaps only to eyes as perceptive and discerning as those of my remarkable friend.